During the absolute depths of the Great Depression, President Franklin Roosevelt set his sights on one part of the country that was hurting more than anywhere else. What he did was, well, it was a massive experiment, a huge gamble that would bring both incredible relief and fierce resistance, and it would change America forever. So let's dive into this story of reform and conflict in the American South. I want to start with a number, $183. Think about that for a second. In 1929, that was the average yearly income for a farmer in the South. I mean, just to put that in perspective, a farmer out on the West Coast was making more than 4 times that amount. This single number really just captures a level of poverty that it's just hard to wrap your head around today. You know, President Roosevelt himself, he didn't mince words about it. He called the South the nation's #1 economic problem. He saw this crushing poverty not as some little regional issue, but as a full-blown national crisis that was threatening the entire country's recovery. He knew something drastic had to be done. So just how bad was it really? Before the New Deal came along, the South wasn't just poor, it was stuck. It was completely trapped in this devastating economic cycle that it just couldn't break out of. And you can really see that massive gap when you look at the numbers. The region's whole economy was built on low-wage, low-skill jobs. You had textile workers, for instance, earning a whopping 25% less than their counterparts in other parts of the country. People were just trapped, underpaid, underfed, and with almost no way out. So what does Roosevelt do? In response, he launches his New Deal, and a lot of its biggest, boldest, most ambitious programs were designed specifically with the South in mind. This was Roosevelt's grand Southern experiment. Roosevelt's strategy was this kind of multi-pronged attack on poverty. You had the Agricultural Adjustment Act, the AAA, which was all about trying to fix those collapsing crop prices. Then there was the National Recovery Administration, the NRA, designed to boost wages and improve working conditions. And then you had the Tennessee Valley Authority, or TVA, and that one was the most ambitious of them all. And the TVA, wow, this really shows you the sheer scale of FDR's vision. I mean, this wasn't just about handing out a few relief checks. This was about total transformation. We're talking about building massive dams to control floods and generate cheap electricity, introducing modern farming techniques, all to create new economic opportunities and, as Roosevelt himself put it, to make a different type of citizen. But here's the thing. These huge, grand experiments, they didn't always work out the way they were planned. The road to recovery was, let's say, bumpy. And for many of the South's most vulnerable people, the New Deal actually ended up creating as many problems as it solved. So let's take a closer look at the AAA. The logic behind it seemed pretty straightforward, right? Cotton prices were in the tank because there was just way too much of it on the market. So the government decided it would literally pay farmers to plant less, which would drive the price back up. And you know what? It worked. The market price for cotton did rise. Okay, but that brings us to the crucial question, the million-dollar question, really. Who actually got that money? In an agricultural system that was totally built on landowners and landless sharecroppers, the answer to that question would decide who got to thrive and who got left behind. And what happened created this stark, tragic division. Those government subsidy checks, they went directly to the landowners. They kept the cash, and a lot of them used it to buy new machinery, like tractors. Well, with fewer acres to farm and new machines to do the work, they just didn't need as many tenants and sharecroppers anymore. So the very people who needed the help the most were kicked off the land, losing their jobs, their homes, everything. As you can imagine, this uneven recovery sparked an absolute firestorm of criticism. Suddenly, Roosevelt found himself under attack from all sides, from people who said he wasn't doing nearly enough, and from others who believed he was doing way, way too much. So coming from the left, you had the populists. Louisiana Senator Huey Long, for one, argued Roosevelt was being too timid. He promoted his famous Share Our Wealth program, which would confiscate huge fortunes and guarantee a minimum income for every family. He was joined by other powerful voices like Francis Townsend, who was pushing for old age pensions, and Father Charles Coughlin, a popular radio priest who was blasting Roosevelt for working with banks. And Huey Long, man, he had a real gift for explaining his ideas in these simple, powerful ways that just clicked with people. His barbecue analogy perfectly captured that sense of injustice that millions were feeling, that a tiny group of wealthy people were hoarding the nation's resources while almost everyone else went hungry. But the attacks weren't just coming from the left. Oh no. the opposition from the right was just as fierce. Conservative business leaders absolutely hated the new regulations. A lot of Southern Democrats, who were on board at first, turned on Roosevelt when his program started to challenge the South's whole low-wage system. And then, looming over everything, was the biggest threat of all: the Supreme Court. And then, things really came to a head. In May of 1935, on a day that became known as Black Monday, the Supreme Court unanimously struck down the NRA, which was a cornerstone of the whole New Deal. Not even a year later, in January 1936, it did the exact same thing to the AAA. Roosevelt's agenda was literally being dismantled piece by piece. But here's the amazing part. Despite all the setbacks, despite the fierce opposition from both the left and the right, the New Deal did succeed in creating these lasting, structural changes that would transform the nation, and especially the South, for decades to come. And two pieces of legislation from this era were just absolute game changers. The Wagner Act of 1935 gave federal protection to workers' rights to unionize and bargain for better wages and conditions, and then the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 established the very first national minimum wage. Now, that first minimum wage, it was only 25 cents an hour. But its impact, especially in the South, was massive, just disproportionately huge. For the very first time, it started to pull Southern wages up toward the national average. It was a direct attack on the region's low-wage economy, and it lifted millions of workers. And at the end of the day, that's the New Deal's most enduring legacy. It fundamentally changed the entire relationship between the American people and their government. For the first time, really, the federal government took direct responsibility for the economic well-being of its citizens. And all of this leaves us with a question that is just as relevant today as it was back in the 1930s. When we're faced with a national crisis, how much power should the government really have to step in and try to solve it? The fierce debates that raged around the New Deal, well, in many ways, they're debates we're still having right now.